As I've mentioned many times before, I grew up being a huge fan of the Final Destination movies, especially the first three as a kid who grew up in the early 2000s. These just felt like a staple of movies I would catch on the Sci-Fi Channel all the time, and I've been covering them and rewatching them and very much enjoying re-experiencing this series. And now we're getting to Final Destination 3, and although I still very much enjoy this movie, it very much feels like the first complacent sequel in this franchise. It feels like especially this is the first time that the formula kind of gets a bit tiring. 2 was able to distance itself a little bit by the fact that they brought back this returning character of Clear who could kind of just cut the bullshit and answer the questions without it just being a rehash of the first movie, of the characters just slowly figuring out what they can do, what's going on, and what Death's design is and what order they're gonna die. They were able to just kind of jump to a new concept. The stuff with bringing new life into the equation, and also even just that forward momentum of having a returning character back. But this one doesn't have returning characters. This one doesn't have William Bloodworth to kind of, do his usual thing that I think adds such a great charm to the first two. And it just puts it on kind of a lower level than those first two, despite the fact that I still very much like it and find it entertaining. And when I say that, it doesn't necessarily make any giant mistakes. It sure as hell doesn't make any of the giant mistakes that the fourth movie makes. It doesn't have any embarrassing moments like that movie does. But this truly felt like the first sequel that was just complacent with doing the regular formula of this franchise. But I do have positives. I really do like the roller coaster idea. I think that's a great idea for a sequence, and the setup is just classic Final Destination. But I still can't help but feel like the movie overall is just the least distinct visually, I would say. Even with how bad some of the missteps are of Final Destination 4, and I don't think that it's for the better, but it definitely does have a much more visually distinct look and identity than 3 does from the first two. I think that 3 very much just feels like the first two. It feels like it looks visually like it, whereas 4 is a lot worse. It looks a lot worse, and it has that CGI shit going on. But it does look different, and I don't think that 3 kind of does that, and that's kind of why it gets lost in the pile of the first 3. For better or worse, this just kind of looks like the first two, and is very much a visual continuation of that. And it kind of makes sense because the director of the first movie is the one who came back for this one, but it just doesn't feel like he introduces enough new concepts. And I genuinely am not trying to sound this harsh and bash on this movie too much, because I do genuinely like it. I think it's a very easy movie to throw on, especially when I'm marathoning these. And I really do pretty much enjoy all the movies in this franchise to at least a certain degree. Even the bad ones I enjoy. Especially too, like I said, when you're binging these movies, I just find 3 very incredibly easy to just roll into after watching the first two. But this felt like the most generic cast of characters so far in this franchise. And it didn't move the needle enough, in my opinion, in terms of the story or the lore with this franchise or these movies, despite the fact that it is incredibly watchable. Great kills, very fun premonition and setup. I love the idea of being locked into the roller coaster, and just that freaky idea of trying to hang on. I find that really incredibly compelling, scary. This reminds me of the story that my dad told me about when he was on a roller coaster and the thing wouldn't go down, and he basically had to have a total meltdown in order to get the person to stop it before it was too late. That's incredibly freaky. The idea of the things falling off and hanging on and going around these loops, that's total nightmare fuel. And again, it doesn't make nearly as many of the offensive mistakes that the fourth movie makes. In terms of acting, characters, CGI, all that stuff is miles better than fourth movie. I think the thing I really remembered about this movie is Mary Elizabeth Winstead. She's great. She's pretty great in every movie she's in, and this is no exception. She does a great job leading this movie. And I feel like I also really remembered the amusement park imagery. I love because it's so good at kind of perverting childhood imagery, things that should be fun, things that should be carefree, but turning them on their heads and making them terrifying and using them to scare the audience. I find incredibly effective. They also do dive into a few things that I appreciated. They definitely focus a lot more on the omens of death in this movie and some of the uncertainty associated with the afterlife, some of the justice associated with death and the unfairness. But still though, at the end of the day, I can't give it too much credit because it's just another set of characters piecing together information that we know because we've seen it twice before. To my knowledge, it feels like the only thing that this movie really adds is the picture concept of foreshadowing death. That just feels like the only kind of new addition or anything that can be added to the lore and the rules of death's design. And that's a bit disappointing because I just think 2 does so many more things in order to escalate that and to give those characters hope. I mean, the picture idea is cool, but like I said, it's just not anything as new or innovative as New Life setting the balance, invalidating death. Or like with the 5th movie where killing someone kind of takes their place in your life. They ponder a bit in this movie, like I mentioned, and some of that stuff's a bit interesting because I feel like they don't do enough in this franchise sometimes to address how these characters are feeling about the uncertainty of death, the unfairness of it, but it is a bit surface level. And this movie doesn't have what's going for it what the first movie did. The first one, you had this mystery of what was going on, and you learn the information along with the characters. In this one, you've seen it twice, like I said. So all you're getting is kind of just this rehashed version of them piecing together the information, looking up news articles of what happened in the first 2 movies, and then figuring out that way. It leaves you with that Final Destination feeling at the end, which I like, but the 3rd act just overall feels a little bit rushed. And it also has this thing that bothers me a little bit about this franchise, which is, when a character is monologuing in front of something big or something obvious, they're having this scene where they're like, I am not going to die today or whatever, and then something falls and crushes them or something happens to them. You know what I'm talking about, I feel like, when the character is having this blow up moment about them not dying or how they've beaten death, something like that, and then something comes along and kills them immediately. And it can be darkly comedic, but I feel like at this point it's just been overused in the franchise, and it's one of the things where it's like, as soon as I see it start to happen, I know exactly where they're going, and I know the character's dead. As a whole, this is a Final Destination movie that I definitely find very watchable, find very enjoyable, but just have some gripes with and find to be probably the most generic. Not the worst, but the most generic. But it is saved by delivering on some of that Final Destination classic stuff that I come to these movies to watch. I'm not going into this looking for The Godfather or anything. And it delivers on the kills. They're good. They have great set pieces, and I like Mary Elizabeth Winstead, so I like this movie. It just feels like when I'm reviewing this movie, I could speak a lot more about the problems I had with it and the negatives rather than the positives, because a lot of my positives are kind of just surface level commentary on what I like about this franchise overall rather than what I like individually about this movie. Because the things that I like about this movie aren't things that I individually like about this movie. It's just things getting delivered that I come to expect from the Final Destination franchise that I enjoy. So it's not the first one that I pick up off the shelf when I'm in the mood to watch one of these, but it's definitely not one that I close to even dread watching. But those are just my thoughts on Final Destination 3. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section. I'd love to hear. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.